Welcome to What the Decks, where over the course of a lunch hour, we take the idea for a deck build from Lunchbox to Deckbox. I'm your host, Skylar, and today I get to play the role of Deck Doctor. We'll be diving into a deck submitted by Zach, viewer and local of mine. So Zach has submitted a Thorns of the Briar Queen plus Fearsome Fortress build for today's episode. And this will be the first time on the show where we've kind of actually got to tackle a second episode with one particular warband. We've definitely had episodes that have tackled the same universal pairing before. For example, we've done Plague Pack and then Crimson Court with the Hungering Parasite. Well, today's the first time we're revisiting a warband in a different context. So before we did a Thorns build with Passive Prophecy and called that, I believe, Prophecy of Thorns. Now I'm curious. Yeah. This time around, we'll be taking a look at a build, submitted by another individual instead of built from the ground up. Zach is somebody who I think is really talented at the game. And I'm really excited to dig into, what he's given here for feedback. And it'll be really fun. Fearsome Fortress, obviously, favorite of the show. The Thorns build that we did, Prophecy of Thorns, was one of my favorite builds that I've got to play as a result of the show. And one that I continually want to revisit. So it's pretty cool to be able to jump into a second look at Thorns here today and to give you something to do with Fearsome Fortress before it rotates out here in October. Better timed episode today than, say, in September. So let's jump into it. All right. So what we're going to do today is... we're going to follow that Deck Doctor format. So for those who aren't familiar with what I look to do in a Deck Doctor like session, is first I want to go in blind. So we're going in blind today, and I want to see if I can kind of figure out what the game plan of the deck is, speak to it, see what I think supports it, and is good strengths, identify the strengths of the deck. And how things support each other. Maybe identify weaknesses of the deck as well, places where it'll struggle. And this isn't going to be necessarily criticism as much as it's going to be like, there might be something that's inherently something the warband, the pairing, maybe the universal side will struggle with. Maybe identifying what matchups it might struggle in, and see if there's any pieces where we can pull out something that kind of contributes to that struggle and maybe replace it with something that isn't at least as struggling or maybe something that's a better fit to help strengthen the deck overall. So that's what we kind of look to do here. We get the fun added bonus of being able to pull up Prophecy of Thorns at some point in time and take a look and see like how many cards similar was it. So here we go. All right. So with Thorns, we're going to start straight away with the objectives here. So Bold Sortie and Earthworks. You're always going to see these in, well, I shouldn't say always. You're going to see these in a lot of Fearsome Fortress decks because they are two amazing surges. And if you can facilitate them, then you should bring them along. So I'm happy to see these two right at the top. Not surprised at all to see them here. So some of the things that makes Bold Sortie and Earthworks work really well here is your ability to push onto objectives, both with cards as well as being able to push multiple fighters at once. So we're just going to take a look. For those who haven't seen Prophecy of Thorns, let's talk a little bit about these fighters. So they're ghostly, so they all have the flying trait here. You can see the wing. And then we do have two wizards. The Briar Queen at level 2, Varklav at level 1. This can be seen as something beneficial. This can be seen as something detrimental. This is actually kind of like a give and take. This warband used to only have one wizard. That used to be the Briar Queen. Now, with this remake, if you, and in the world of salvage these days, if the Briar Queen goes down, The give and take here is you have a backup wizard with Varklov already established that you might be able to utilize. However, only on one dice, and even when inspired. So there's a higher chance that that spell isn't going to go off. And maybe you would have rather salvaged that spell. But Varklov is so key to this warband that he's really never going to see sacrifice towards the purpose of like deck smoothing. I think in most cases that's a bad play. So that means spell cards are going to be stuck in your hand even when Briar Queen isn't there. And that might be something that it isn't necessarily ideal. I heard the doorbell ring. It's something I expected, but it definitely threw my train of thought off there. And nothing I need to go attend to. Okay. So another thing about this warband is that we have the Briar Queen starting on 2 dodge, which is awesome. It means you can, 2 dodge, 4 health. You can probably be a little riskier with her with your positioning up front. The rest need to earn that 2 dodge and have very little health. So very low health. We have 4 chain rasps. Well, technically 5 chain rasps, but the Everhanged kind of hangs out in his own category. So we'll say 4 minions that are also chain rasps, and they all have these 2 health values. And for the most part, you can kind of trade each one out for the other. They do have different opportunities that they'll offer you when they're on their inspired side. For example, we have the axe wielders, these 2 that are going to grant you 2 damage on their inspired side instead of just 1. If you need stagger or knockback, you can prioritize the silenced. And if you need cleave, you can prioritize the uncrowned here. And both of these getting more accurate instead of getting more damage available to them. But for the most part, you can kind of swap these guys out. They're bodies that are going to be holding or being in positions that you need them to be in, sort of a deal. To circle back to that wizard piece, by the way, I've never built a Force of Frost deck with these guys. But with the chance or the ability to crank Varklov up to 2, to bring in the wizard stick, I think it's called. I actually forget what it's called. It's some sort of staff. I'd have to look it up because everybody I know just calls it the wizard stick. So I always forget what it's actually called. But we need to load them in anyways, so we can take this as an opportunity to take a look at that here. Rivals of the Mirrored City. There we go. And all right, let's load Force of Frost real quick, just out of curiosity. What's that staff actually named? Upgrade. It is called the Everwinter staff. I almost called it like the Everhanged staff, so I guess at least my brain was grabbing onto Ever, but I was like, wait a minute, no, our Everhanged is right here. So Everwinter staff as another way to get a wizard. And like, there's like Cold of the Void, which is positioning based, and even though you have so many bodies, you have such good movement tech that maybe there's something there. I don't know if it's the best build in the world, but I don't think that building with Force of Frost is necessarily a bad build path for these individuals. That might be their, one of their more aggro playstyles, because you can definitely do a little bit of swarm aggro in here due to the fact that once a fighter has a charged out token, they're offering double support. So there's another thing to talk about, regarding the Briar Queen's units here. So all of them have Wave of Terror. Wave of Terror is hosted on her card, but they all individually have it. So if your leader goes down, like that's not a problem. It's just on her for saving space purposes. So the reminder text, how the ability actually exists is here, whereas the rest just kind of point to it instead of having to spell it out on each card and take up all that room. And then so I mentioned before, Varklov is really key to your warband. So Varklov has this action: choose up to 2 friendly chain rasps, push each chosen fighter up to 2 X's. You can give each chosen fighter 1 charge token. So again, you can kind of use him to help manipulate either a charged out status, probably something you're not really going for, maybe late game that matters a little bit more, but a lot of the time you're going for that charge token because of Wave of Terror, if you're going for one at all. And then these 3 are kind of like your main fighters. The Everhanged has this throttle reaction. Use this after your activation step. This is after, like, no matter who you activated. So it's your activation step is when you're reacting to this, not your activation step if Everhanged is the one that you activated. So then roll 1 magic dice for each enemy fighter adjacent to this fighter on a roll of channel or channel or crit. Stagger that fighter. So channel being the more common facing that we're going to see on these dice. So you have 3 of those, 4 when you add in the crit. So we're looking at a 66% chance to stagger a target with the Everhanged after any of your activations. So this is something that I was using when I was playing the Prophecy build to get people staggered so that they couldn't delve a token underneath them, and that would help me secure the 5-pointer. Complete harmony in Passive Prophecy. But I could see us using this just universally. Like it's really good to be able to get staggered out. In fact, with Fearsome Fortress here, I don't see the reprisal. What is it? All right, let's load in our correct pairing here. Rivals of the Mirrored City and Fearsome Fortress. And it's not an upgrade. It's a Gambit, actually. Opportunistic Reprisal. Play this after an enemy fighter's attack action. If that fighter is staggered, choose 1 friendly fighter. The chosen fighter makes 1 attack action that must target that enemy fighter. I don't necessarily think this is the play. I just think that it's fun that there is room for this to a degree. It's probably always going to be that 11th or 12th card that never makes it into the deck here. It's very rare when putting opportunistic reprisal in your deck is the right answer. I can think of like Sirenized Razors, absolutely. The Brethren of the Bolt, absolutely. And potentially the Claw Pack, Skittershank's Claw Pack. They might all look at opportunistic reprisal. Most other warbands can't afford it because they don't have enough natural instances of stagger coming into play. You kind of want stagger to be something that you're not working towards, but something that's happening regardless of what you're doing, and then it really opens up opportunistic reprisal. So I think that about does it for notes on the warband. You know, our only range 2 inherently is the Briar Queen. Yeah, so let's dive in. Bolt Surdy and Earthworks. We can use Varklov right away. Like this fighter is so vital to your warband, especially when you're doing hold, to push 2 fighters onto objectives, right? And so all of a sudden, and you can choose charge tokens, but here, if we're looking at Bolt Sortie or Earthworks, we obviously would not be wanting to do that because we're looking to spend 1 activation putting 2 fighters into position. Excellent. Then our next activation would potentially be scoring Bold Sortie or Earthworks. But what's awesome about this is anytime you're using an ability like Varklov, like the Sepulchral Guard have this as well, and you're being able to cheat this action economy, you're able to say, like, unless you can cheat action economy as well with power cards or abilities on your side of the table, I'm always like outpacing how many objectives I can hold, assuming I can reach enough of them, right? So if I can push onto 2 in most of my turns and you can only remove me off of 1 of them on your turn with like a drive back or a kill, then I'm staying ahead when I'm trying to hold. And that's what makes them a really, really good hold warband. And in this case, prime candidates for scoring things like Bolt Sortie and Earthworks. We are also going to have things like, yes, perfect, take your positions. I'm super glad to see this in this deck. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters in your territory other than your leader. Push each chosen fighter 1 hex towards the nearest feature token. So that means at the very beginning of the game, if you want, like as you're deploying your fighters, you're going to have your cards in hand. If you see take your positions, then you're putting fighters in starting hexes right next to tokens, and you're starting the game like even faster. And so that's something that you want to keep in mind when you're placing your objective tokens at the beginning of the game, is you want to make sure that they are next to starting hexes, so that because you're mindful of the fact that you have take your positions in your deck, you're able to immediately make use of that and push onto these tokens after that first power step. And then we're already, you know, a Varklov activation deep without having to do anything. And that's awesome. So let's focus first, and this is generally what I try to do with the deck doctor. We'll focus first on each piece, so objectives first, and then we'll kind of pull the puzzle together and see what cards point towards and support the objectives. Sometimes I just get excited, get ahead of myself, like is this card in here to support this? I would hope to see it, things like that. And I definitely am happy to see take your positions in here with these two cards. Impregnable defenses. Score this immediately after an enemy fighter's failed attack action that targeted a friendly fighter on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory. I'm curious what this slot could have looked like, because this is a card that I struggle with because it has to be a failed attack action. I think that this is totally okay when we're looking at 2 dodge though, and with how much we can facilitate being within 1 hex of no one's territory, this is definitely dice dependent, right? We need them to try to hit us and we need it to fail. But as we kind of look at the rest of this picture, we can see how good this surge slot is, or if this is kind of a point of struggle that we can look to maybe put something better there. To the walls, score this immediately after an activation step if your warband holds more objectives than any other warband, and each objective token within 1 hex of no one's territory is in a hex occupied by a friendly fighter. So I remember that there was like discussion online about, can there be zero for that second condition, each objective token within 1 hex of no one's territory. So what if there's 0 objectives within 1 hex of no one's territory? And I forget where it all panned out. I'm in the camp of, I think I'm in the camp of at least 1 needs to be present. I wish I had a definitive answer for you, like coming into this episode today. I don't normally run this card simply because the most amount of time I spend with Fearsome Fortress is with Headcrack as Mad Mob. So To the Walls isn't necessarily a card I always run. I like it here, even if the answer is there has to be at least 1 within 1 hex of no one's territory. But I definitely wish I knew for sure if that could be 0. So maybe we circle back to that a little bit later. I'll think about it. I'm going to actually make a note here real quick in case we have time to circle back on that. Maybe I can dig up the conversation, and it will be such an enthralling part of today's episode. To the Walls. Can it be scored? Can it be scored if there is if there is 0 tokens? So, if I don't get to it by the end of today's episode, then my curiosity will at least drive me to look it up and get a YouTube comment in the comment section. So, be on the lookout for that. But for now, we're going to assume it requires at least 1 for the purposes of today's episode. And yeah, I think this is great. We're a hold proper warband. Like, we should be able to score this card. Bypass the guards. Surge. Dual score this immediately after a friendly fighter makes a move action, which moved through 1 or more hexes that contained an enemy fighter. And that fighter ended that move action on a feature token. What's really great about this is on a feature token, right? So it's not actually requiring an objective token. This card is made all the better by the Fearsome Fortress pairing here, because that is going to be pretty close to the middle section anyways. So somebody that is like up against the line might be able to run over and touch somebody and then dip back, maybe 1 hex onto that feature token that you placed as a part of Fearsome Fortress. So you might place that within 1 hex of one of their starting fighters, knowing that you have this and that you could surge into it. I like this card quite a bit. I found this to be like extremely reliable for scoring in the Passive Prophecy build. So good to see it here. Distract the Watch. Score this immediately after an activation step if activation step. So that's awesome because it can be yours or theirs. 1 or more friendly fighters are adjacent to an enemy fighter and 2 or more other friendly fighters are on objectives. So you can get this all completely situated in the course of your turn, pass turn to them, and if they don't adjust this equation, it's scoring. I think Distract the Watch might be their best surge. I really like this one. And I'm sure we're gonna take a lot looks at push tech and Gambits that all crank this up. So, and one trick too, like if you're worried about the 1 or more friendly fighters are adjacent to an enemy fighter bit, like I guess it doesn't matter which part you're worried about, but you can always add 1, right? So like if you're passing it to their turn, for example, and you don't think that you're going to be able to have this true at the end of their turn because you're worried somebody's going to get hit off of an objective, well, then in that case, can you make 3 objectives happen? Because then even if they kick you off of 1, you're still scoring your surge. Or if it's the first part that you're worried about, 1 or more friendly fighters are adjacent to enemy fighters, well, can you make that 2? That way you're not just plan hinged on that single fighter in that position. All right, so Conquer Domain, probably a blast here. I'm always looking for excuses to play Fearsome Fortress and give it some more time before it's out the door. So Conquer Domain is my favorite objective in the Nemesis environment, period. So I love this card. I love that it's always going to, for the most part, get you at least 1 glory, but you can decide, to hold it over and go for big. You can set up early and go for big. Like, if you're playing Exiled Dead with Fearsome Fortress, which is something that our local, Wellner, our local Exiled Mad Scientist took to Adepticon, like, he scored a 6 glory Conquer Domain with Exiled Dead while he was there, and that's a blast. Like, there aren't really cards that can go from 1 to 6, but this one can. And what it's asking of you, being able to just sit on feature tokens in that territory and have something like Walking Wall, which I'm noticing is in our upgrades, help towards that count. It's just a really fun push or pull. Like, as soon as you're playing Fearsome Fortress, your opponent knows that Conquer Domain is likely in your deck, and so they're starting to think, like, I need to pull them off of those feature tokens. And you can even put pressure on the feature tokens, making them think you have bigger scores than you do and distracting them from the scores that you're actually trying to secure, which is another reason why I really like Conquer Domain. So yeah, awesome. Stockpile, score this in an end phase if your warband holds objectives whose numbers add up to 6 or more. And this card is awesome because it's not looking for an exact value. All those cards in Passive Prophecy are looking for exact values. Here, we just need to get to that 6 as a minimum. And so we can be at 9, right? We could be at 10. And so with the amount of objective situating that we have available to us, the amount of positioning tech that we have available to us, that I think this is awesome. Like, I run this in Fort Crackas. So being able to have 7 fighters to help me situate that and teleports and pushes, yeah, no, this is total take. Underground Fortress. Now, this is a card that I have not always considered over the course of the lifetime of like Fearsome Fortress. But once I finally tried it out and gave it a good chance, it became a favorite of mine as well. Like, I really like going for Underground Fortress. We have so many bodies that can go for this. So 3 or more friendly fighters are on feature tokens, and 2 or more of those fighters are adjacent. So what that ends up meaning, right, is that 2 of those feature tokens have to be near each other, or like adjacent to each other, but that could be Walking Wall as well as one of those. So you could have 2 fighters on objectives. Don't even need to be objectives. They could be feature tokens. They could be cover. And then you could hug one of them with your Walking Wall fighter, and you've met Underground Fortress. There are multiple other ways to work towards it as well. So knowing it's in the deck, then at the very beginning with your plot card, you want to put that feature token adjacent to one of the tokens that have been placed during setup. And then right out of the gate, you have a scoreable landing zone for Underground Fortress. The only problem with this is in a best of 3, especially, your opponent's going to become quite familiar with what that landing zone looks like and what it's there for. So kicking somebody off of one of those tokens might help them in one sweep deny Underground Fortress and reduce your Conquered Domain potential. So that's something to think about, but it's still worth positioning for. It's still worth threatening. And you can, I don't know if we're running... Oh, we are. Hey, we're running some tricks in here to move feature tokens around to help secure this as well. And we'll get to those. And the plunder ability as well will help score Underground Fortress. A lot of the times when you're playing hold proper, fights happen around objective tokens. And so when you take an enemy out, there's a good chance that they're on or next to a feature token. Next to being really beneficial here because we can then plunder a cover into that location. All right, so on to Dread Reputation. So score this in an end phase if each surviving enemy fighter is adjacent to one or more friendly fighters, or each surviving friendly fighter has one or more move and or charge tokens. So each surviving enemy fighter is adjacent to one or more friendly fighters. So we're making sure that there isn't a single enemy fighter unhugged, hugs all around, or each surviving friendly fighter has one or more move and or charge tokens. As the game goes on, this gets easier. So out of the gate, if you have Dread Reputation in your opening hand, this is probably going to be something I would recommend mulliganing out. But let's say you mulligan into it, or you can't afford the mulligan because you've got 2 banger surges. Then Varklov is going to push 2 fighters, give them charge tokens. Varklov is going to... Oh, no, this isn't going to work out. Yeah, we're going to be in activation short. So, like, in order to score this off of the second condition, so Varklov for 2. Varklov for 2. We only have 2 activations left. We still need 3. So you can accomplish that with moving or charging 2 of these, but then you need a power card that is also going to offer you a move or a charge token to handle the third, unless you get lucky and one of these fighters die. But is that really lucky? So early game, you're probably focusing on hugging all of them. Late game, the second condition should really become unlocked for you. All right, Reclaimed Turf. Score this in an end phase if your warband holds 3 or more objectives, and your warband holds 1 or more objectives in no one's and or enemy territory. This card is, in my experience, really easy to score. Like, you can always have 2 objectives kind of in your backfield. As I was playing them, I found that to be some of the most comfortable positioning over the courses of my games with them, is 2 in the backfield if you can, 1 in no one's territory, again if you can, and then 2 in their territory. I like 1 just over the line and 1 in the back. And the 1 in the back is something that I can teleport to, and once I'm there, like, there's a lot of push or pull on the map then, right? Like, anytime a fighter makes a move, they're either moving closer or further away from that objective, and they're having to make hard decisions. So if you can put 1 on either side of the map and hold both of those, then they at some point in time have to make choices on how they're going to address that, and they probably can't address both places, not easily anyways. So Reclaim Turf, you want like 2 or 3 opportunities for the no one's territory and the enemy territory part of this, but I found it to be a really reliable score. So fan of it there. And then Tide of Death. This is awesome. Score this in an end phase if your warband holds more objectives than each other warband. So this is something that they're going to constantly needing to be fighting and be aware of. The feature tokens that you're going to be hanging on, aren't going to qualify for this. So there's a little bit like, so every objective you're on works for Tide of Death and can work for your Fearsome Fortress scoring here, these 3. But if it's a feature token, it's working for something like Conquer Domain and Underground Fortress and not working for Tide of Death. I don't think that's a problem, but it is something that you should, be mindful of, that sometimes if you're not paying attention to, is it a feature token or is it objective, it could detract from one of the cards that you're trying to accomplish, and just be mindful of it, right? Like, make sure that you're accommodating the scoring to the best of your ability. Now, something that I see a lot of players like fall into that I think is a trap is thinking that every objective in their hand needs to be scored right now. So this is a good time to kind of inject this piece of advice, I think. So if I had cards that were pulling against each other, like ones that I know I can get onto these feature tokens and it's going to help me with Conquer Domain or Underground Fortress, but I could go for a more tenuous position, probably like a harder position for me to acquire or an easier one for them to deny or pull me off of. And like that's going to help me with something like Tide of Death. That's going to help me with something like Reclaimed Turf. And I'm going to be able to get multiple cards in one go. Think to yourself, how's your pacing? Pacing is something that you can consider in this game. So with 12 objectives and 3 rounds, you're looking at an average of 4 objectives a round. And you don't need to score 3 end phases in any round for the most part. So like what I mean by that is if you have an objective that you can start lining up for, but not necessarily meet at this time, and an objective you can meet at this time, that's okay. Like go for the objective that you can meet at this time. Do what you can to set up the objective that you see, as well as the objectives you don't see. Always thinking about what you don't see. Like if I do this position, do I, and I have a surge in my hand, I'm going to surge eventually. What am I potentially denying myself of when I surge? Like, am I going to draw another surge and I've now made it impossible to score? Am I going to draw an end phase? Like, could I? Because every card that you haven't drawn yet is Schrodinger's objective, right? Like, you don't know yet what it is. So you got to think, like, potentially as you get familiar with your deck, what can I be working towards in advance without subtracting from like the current game plan, and what can the current game plan facilitate without subtracting from future cards. So to bring that back to pacing, because I started to tangent away from that into just always think about the cards that can come. So you have 6 end phase, right? So in a round, like that looks like either scoring 2 end phase a round as an average, or maybe 1, 2, and then 3. If you can score 3 in your like opening round, 3 end phase objectives, you only have 3 left. Like, don't sweat it. Like you have, you can, if you have 2 in your hand for round 2, and you're like, man, one of these is going to be really hard right now, but really easy next round, don't even go for it in your second round. You've already scored 3 objectives. You're ahead of your average. Like, think about your pacing. And your pacing position is improved by every surge you've scored. Like, if you get super lucky, score 4, 5, 6 objectives in round 1, like surge objectives, then you're off to the races and you're only worrying about your end phase, and you have a lot more breathing room to consider that. So just something I see from a trap standpoint. I see people chase cards in their hand even though that wasn't the right decision for that round, and it hurt their board position overall, or they strained themselves across 2, 3 objectives thinking like, I need to try to get all of them right now, and then something happened that they didn't anticipate, something didn't go their way, and all of a sudden they've lost multiple objectives instead of just one. So keep that in mind. All right, on to the next part here. So I really like this objective pool that we have from Zach here. Impregnable Defenses is probably my least favorite card in here, just because it's going to require that dice defense. But it's a position we have a lot of incentive to be hanging around in, and we do have 2 dice to help with it. And maybe he has some guard tech in here, or maybe the right answer at some point in time is to put ourselves on guard in one of these positions, maybe for Earthworks, and we get lucky and we draw into Impregnable Defenses as well. Hold on. My voice hasn't been the same since the weekend. My wife and I were able to celebrate 8 years together this last weekend. So six years married, but 8 years together was a important milestone for us. Something we were really excited about, because we both came from long-term relationships, and we are officially each other's longest running relationships. And that is something really cool, something that we'd been saying this entire time that we'd been together that we wanted to celebrate. And so my voice is a little shot from enjoying and celebrating this weekend. And I'm looking forward to so many more years with my wife. She's my best friend. So, Brian, you are too. It's different. I can have two best friends. I'm married to one of them. But anyways, I'm kind of a guy who's always had multiple best friends anyways. You all know who you are. All right. So over here, we're looking at Gambits and upgrades. So Bound Spirit, play this after an enemy fighter's activation if that fighter is adjacent to one or more feature tokens that are in the same hex as a friendly fighter. Deal 1 damage to that enemy fighter. So after an enemy fighter's activation, if that fighter is adjacent to one or more feature tokens that are in the same hex as a friendly fighter. So this card almost always gets cut out of Fearsome Fortress decks for me. Right away, this is going to be a slot that I'm looking to make a recommendation for. And the reason for that is because of the reaction window here, the positioning of these fighters. So if they make an attack action against you and they're able to move you, even with a drive back, you're no longer in position to pull this trap out. And so I find that this can be a really unreliable reaction. And you don't want to be trapped into holding it across rounds, right? So maybe in a round, there's, a couple of times where this could occur and the dice aren't going your way. Then do you hold it into the next round? And I think the answer is almost always certainly no. And so if it's a card you're not willing to hold across rounds, then it's probably not a card that you want to bring along for the ride to begin with. That's not always true. Like that particular piece of advice on on cards like this, but it is something to consider, especially with reactions. Like, am I going to be trapped into holding this card across rounds, and is that a problem, or is that fine? Like something like the Curse Hungers, I think is the name of the card where you can react to a failed attack and make it again if you have the Hungering Parasite. We're going to take a look. Something like the Curse Hungers. Yeah, that's exactly what that card is called. Is the type of card where if I get trapped into holding this cross rounds, frankly, that's a good thing. That probably means I have been making my attack actions and not needing this, and can continue to bank it for that moment where that condition becomes true, and that's often always going to be a benefit. So this is kind of the other side of that question, that analysis that you're doing of a card with a reaction attached to it. So especially a ploy. Okay, let's jump back into our Fearsome Fortress pairing here. A ploy or a Gambit spell. Okay. So Makeshift Bombardment. This is a fantastic card. If you should always be able to find a use for this. So choose one friendly fighter on a feature token and choose one enemy fighter visible to that fighter. So visibility is interesting. Not all ploys look for visibility. A lot of spells do. Inherently, anytime a spell has the word choose, it's looking for visibility as well. So keep that in mind if you didn't know that. So choose here isn't summoning visibility because this isn't a Gambit spell. But if this was a Gambit spell, it would instantly summon visibility. So in here, we also have and choose one enemy fighter visible to that fighter and within 3 hexes of that friendly fighter. Pick one, stagger the chosen enemy fighter, or push the chosen enemy fighter 1 hex away from the chosen friendly fighter. So what you're going to use this for most often is going to be that push. And within 3 hexes is fantastic. So think about this when you are setting up your objective tokens at the beginning of the game. Keep Makeshift Bombardment in mind. Within 3 hexes is the positioning requirement for objective tokens at the beginning of the game. You're going to have 2 empty spaces, from your objective to the next one, And so that next space is, that third space. So if I'm on an objective and I did minimum placement requirements to the next objective, then it's within 3 of me. So especially for any that you're putting in and around what I refer to as fortress territory, which is no man's territory and one on either side of it. So that's fortress territory. If you're placing anything objective-wise within fortress territory, make sure you have a backup objective at that minimum distance from it. You can put somebody on there and then kick somebody off of a fortress token. And those fortress tokens are going to be more valuable to your scoring overall. Makeshift bombardment isn't looking for you to be on a fortress token position. It's any feature token. So it really is like a wide open push. And if you don't need it for the push, you can use it for the stagger. And that's great too. This card's fantastic. Ready for anything. +1 defense to each friendly fighter on a feature token in the next activation step. So this combos well with Bound Spirit. That might be one of the reasons why Bound Spirit found its way in here. This works really well for impregnable defenses. This helps support those positions and make sure that you can kind of feel out, like, first off, if you have the surge in your hand, that's awesome. But you can kind of feel out, am I about to be attacked in no one's territory? Does that feel like the next thing my opponent's going to do? If the answer is yes, at least in your mind, you can play ready for anything and add defense to everybody on a feature token. This is great because this is often where they're gonna try to remove you from. Love seeing this in here. This helps with the whole objective suite. Redeploy as a favorite. Choose one friendly fighter on a feature token in your territory. Push that fighter up to 4 hexes. At the end of that push, that fighter must be on a feature token. So super cool card. If you have Walking Wall, you can actually use Walking Wall as your starting point and your ending point. And that is not that there is an old card combo. We covered this previously on the show, where you use, I forget what it's called, Darkening Stone and Cover of Darkness, and it doesn't work, what I just described. Like if you just have those 2 cards, and so the fighter's equipped with Darkening Stone and you use Cover of Darkness, that combo doesn't work. So it's really cool to keep in mind that Walking Wall plus Redeploy does work that way. The only thing that you have to keep in mind in addition to that is where you're starting that push from. So choose one friendly fighter on a feature token in your territory. So your starting position can't be no one's territory. Your starting position can't be enemy territory. But as long as you start in your territory, then you can push forward to anywhere if you have Walking Wall, which is really cool. But you can use this to take a position that you're holding safely from the back, and then transition it to a fortress territory position. And that can be a trick that you're using for offense. That can be a trick that you're just using for scoring. That can be like on a fighter that maybe doesn't have a move or a charge token yet, and you've just increased, the distance that they're able to make a move or charge by 3-4, with the use of Redeploy here. So a really fantastic card. And take your positions. We've already talked about why this is a good one. The one thing we haven't talked about is that it is salvageable based on your leader. I find when I play them, my leader is somebody I'm a bit more reckless with, just because of her health pool, just because that she's already starting on 2 dodge, and like there's a stronger chance that if my opponent's bringing dice against any of my fighters, at the beginning of the game, that she might be able to shake it off entirely, or at least absorb an attack, absorb an action that maybe other fighters couldn't have absorbed, and so I'd already be down a fighter. And she's also just really good, like being able to throw 2 damage at range 2 right out of the gate with 3 swords. That's a fairly accurate profile. It's marginally more accurate than like 2 smash, and the reason for that is because you have 3 dice that can achieve crits instead of just 2. So it kind of cranks up the accuracy just marginally, and the ability of your opponent to defend it. Whereas over here, on her flip side, She actually has Grievous 1 as well, so she flips up to 3 damage. I think she's pretty scary, and especially if you're not running spells, which we're not here. Well, we're running one, but we'll talk about that. When you're not super spell focused, you can really afford that risky position with her. And then take your positions is best during your early rounds, because you're spending more time, I feel, in your early rounds, round 1 for sure. Like if you don't have good pushes in your opening hand, definitely mulligan, and then maybe you luck into take your positions. Probably the strongest one of the pushes that you can luck into, in that first round. But this card kind of gets worse as the game goes on and your fighters dwindle. If you've kind of flipped territories and you're trying to hold more in theirs and in no one's, this card isn't going to do as much for you. So being able to salvage it if your leader has gone down is really nice in that situation. I'm going to take a drink of water. So I raised this up before and did not take a drink. All right. On to their part of the 50-50 here. So we have 5 cards from Fearsome and 5 cards from In Faction. So Shanker. Shanker is a blast. Play this during a friendly fighter's attack action. After the declare attack action step, choose a friendly minion, remove the chosen fighter from the battlefield, then place that fighter in an empty hex adjacent to the target. Then you can give the chosen fighter a charge token. So this isn't always going to line up for you, what I'm about to describe, but man, is it awesome when it does. And it's lined up more than once for me. So if you have one of them that's next to an objective token or a feature token, but your main priority is objective tokens next to it, because maybe they just removed somebody from it. Maybe they started there. I've actually done this twice off of just starting hex positions. That has made me really happy. I'll charge one fighter in, and then be able to use Shanker to react, move one of my minions into that objective position as part of my attack, give him a charged out token, why not, and then make that attack like far more accurate. Now, a reason for maybe not giving them a charge out token, by the way, because there's definitely give or take, is if they are then later driven off of this position or pushed off this position. If you have a charge token, then you're relying on tricks to get back into position, maybe Varklov. Whereas if you didn't take on a token, then you can still move or charge back into that position. So that's something to weigh in the moment. But Shanker is really great. Like, it's just fantastic for getting new positioning off, and it could even then provide you with like a better launch point for a fighter later too. It's just able to change up the board quite a bit. And there's also cards in here where, like, let's say, does he run it? Perfect. Unliving Overseer. Here we go. So you cannot give this to a minion. Drive minion. Reaction. After this fighter's activation, choose one friendly chain rasp within 2 hexes of this fighter. Pick one. Push the chosen fighter. Reading is difficult. Pick one, push the chosen chain rasp 1 hex, or that chain rasp makes an attack action, then break this card. So if Unliving Overseer is on the one that you are making a charge with, making an attack with, right? And you Shanker somebody in, maybe then they end up 1 away from an objective token. Well, after the attack, you're able to use the drive minion reaction to push them, right? Or maybe all of a sudden this is a double attack out of nowhere that wasn't anticipated, and the chain rasp was able to make an attack. You lose Unliving Overseer after that, but Unliving Overseer is probably my favorite of their upgrades. It's so good. Awful Lear is up there too, so glad to see both. Shanker, good. Being able to react and teleport, very good. Spectral Parry, choose a friendly fighter that does not have 1 or more guard tokens. Give the chosen fighter 1 guard token. This card's fantastic. Again, maybe this helps contribute towards a Bound Spirit take. I still don't like it. We are relying on a combo, but that is multiple cards now to help the combo out. I see Siege Master in here as well. We're at like 3 cards to help the combo out. I just think that there might be better use of this slot. So we'll circle back yet and take a look at that. But Spectral Parry, I think, is fantastic. Like, so not only is it taking 2 dodge from 2 facings on a 6-sided defense dice, it's taking it to 4 facings on a 6-sided defense dice, but it's also then not allowing you to be driven back, and that is exactly what you need when you're trying to hold objectives. So Spectral Parry is fantastic. Terrifying Advance. Choose 2 friendly fighters. Stagger each enemy fighter adjacent to the chosen fighters. If there are no enemy fighters adjacent to a chosen fighter, you can push that chosen fighter 1 hex instead. So an extremely flexible card. The only thing that like it lacks in flexibility is you must choose 2 friendly fighters. So if you're down to 1, then Terrifying Advance isn't going to go off. But you have worse problems at that point in time, then Terrifying Advance isn't going to go off. Assuming you have at least 2 fighters to choose, then you've got some really good flexibility here. Being able to stagger, making easier attacks, or potentially even just turning this into a push 2 is really good. And what this ends up doing is this ends up being a redundancy with take your positions. So these cards can serve the same purpose in round 1, and that's fantastic to be able to get that sort of redundancy in here. That makes Bold Sortie and Earthworks that much more reliable, and it gets you into all your scoring positions, changes the game around to being they need to take you off of your scoring positions. Now, something to keep in mind with pushes is there's an advantage to your opponent having to take you off of scoring positions, especially if you go second, because then you're going to have time to get back on if they're successful. But there's also something to be said about saving your pushes for the final power step and getting into those positions. You always have to weigh that. It's a fun thing where like the right answer is not black and white. I can't tell you save all your pushes, for right before the end phase, or start with all your pushes, get into your scoring positions. It's not as black and white as that. You have to think about like, is this position in danger of them getting onto it? And that affects your decision to go forward with a push, because if you're worried about them getting onto it and you're going to have a difficult time removing them from it, then you might want to use that push earlier. And so then they're the one that has to continually try to take you off of it. Maybe they're successful and then you're able to get back on it because they use their activation to take you off of it, and then they didn't have a way to get on it before they activate it again, right? And in the meantime, you have 2 power steps and activations to get back into that spot. So sometimes the right answer is forcing them to pull you off. Other times it's, hey, there isn't really a big threat of this position, and there isn't a scoring reason for me to jump on it immediately. I just need to be on it before end phase. I'm going to hold off. I'm going to save this push. And that also has the advantage of making your opponent think that you don't have as many scoring positions set up over the course of the round. They might think that you're behind on getting your scoring positions set up, and their focus might be elsewhere. And then all of a sudden, you've just been holding cards that were going to get you into those scoring positions the whole time, and they weren't able to weigh that into their activations. So things to think about. So that's Terrifying Advance. Unbound Crooks. Choose a friendly fighter with no move or charge tokens. Remove the chosen fighter from the battlefield and place them on an empty hex in no one's territory. Then give the chosen fighter a charge or a move token. So you will have to award a token for this. It's your choice, which is awesome. And this is like the strongest reason to make sure that you have something to land on during placements. So that might be an objective token. That's awesome if you can get an objective token in no one's territory, because Unbound Crooks can land you there at some point in time. But if it's not that, then maybe your Fortress token is the one that should be there. That way you still have something that you can land on. Yeah, Unbound Crooks is awesome. Even if you're not landing on a token, like the ability to just reposition there off of a ploy is fantastic. And then sudden mugging. If cast, so we're looking for a focused here. So if we have the Briar Queen, a focus on 2 dice, or Varklov here, a focus off of 1. Sudden mugging. If cast, choose a friendly chain rasp, place the chosen fighter in an empty hex. If the chosen fighter is not adjacent to one or more enemy fighters, give the chosen fighter a charge token. So this is the teleport that I was alluding to earlier. This often is used to get you onto an objective in enemy territory, or at least an objective that's far away from the enemy. At that time, you would receive a charge token, because that's why it's called mugging, right? So if the chosen fighter is not adjacent to one or more enemy fighters, give the chosen fighter a charge token. If you perform a mugging and you appear adjacent to an enemy fighter, then you don't actually have to opt in for the charge token. In fact, a charge token doesn't occur. You don't even get an option for it. So that's something to keep in mind there, but sudden mugging is fantastic. Overall, love the Gambits. I mean, if we take a look at it from like a what is positioning tech in here with a hold warband, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards to help us position ourselves. We could even lump makeshift bombardment in there and call that 7. That's amazing. So hold on, is there really 7? Yeah, because then the other, so we've got go on guard and ready for anything. These help us hold existing positions, defend ourselves. So that's 2 of the 10, and then lastly is this bound spirit, this trap. So yeah, 7 cards in here directly correlate to positioning and making sure that we can get onto our scoring positions. Awesome. Fantastic. And then if we jump over to upgrades to kind of round out this picture here before we look at cards that were left on the cutting table here and maybe things that we'd recommend sliding in. Last up, again, upgrades. So Bold Engineer, +2 move except during a charge action. Reaction after a friendly fighter's activation. Pick 1 feature token in an empty hex adjacent to this fighter. Place that feature token in this fighter's hex. This card is fantastic for a few reasons, especially with the amount of fighters that we're playing around with. So the +2 move as not part of a charge action. If we get a little Seed Glory, this could actually be the difference between being able to score something like bypass the guards or not, because we do have to make a move action through a fighter, and therefore we might not have enough movement speed to do so. At the beginning of the game, we're at 3. We do go up to 4 when we inspire. So once we're inspired, it becomes much more likely. But let's say we haven't inspired yet. It's early game. We got our Seed Glory, and we have Bold Engineer in hand, and bypass the guards waiting to score. This can bump us up to 5 move and get us a glory, and possibly get us into a scoring position as well. The only reason I say possibly there is because this is a feature token, and I'm not sure if that's going to be serving our end phases, because it's going to surge out of our hand and we're going to get something new. But Bold Engineer is fantastic for that, as well as this reaction, because this reaction is after a friendly fighter's activation. So you can be on a scoring position on your on a feature token. You can get hit off, like somebody comes over, drives you back off of it. Okay, that's fine. On your next turn, you don't need to worry about it. You can be like, I'm going to activate totally somebody else, like on my team. And then after their turn, I'm going to react with Bold Engineer, and I'm going to slide that objective I was driven off of right back underneath me. So Bold Engineer will really help you hold on to a feature token. You can even put it on a fighter, going into your turn that's just currently adjacent, to a feature token, and they can help slide that underneath. This can also help you situate Underground Fortress, or better, Conquer Domain. We have Bunny.zip with us. Hey, some quick fortress action before it rotates. Absolutely. So this is particularly a deck that was submitted to me. And so that was, I was going to tackle this mission regardless today, but it was really cool to see that it was a Fearsome Fortress position, because I'm happy to give us as much time with Fearsome Fortress ideas as you can get before they rotate out in October, because I love this deck so much. So Bold Engineer, solid card, definitely have plenty of throughputs across what it can provide you from an objective standpoint, from Conquer Domain to Underground Fortress to bypass the guards. And heck, it could even help set up Bold Sortie or Earthworks if you haven't been able to get those yet. Bold Engineer might be able to grab a token underneath you, and then your next turn is Bold Sortie Earthworks off of it. Rapid Defender. After an enemy, so reaction, after an enemy fighter's move action, if that enemy fighter is in no one's territory or your territory, push this fighter 1 hex towards that fighter. And this card is like always my 11th card in a Fortress deck. It always ends up in the consideration pile, and it like almost always gets tested. If it doesn't get tested, it ends up just sitting there waiting for a card to like fail me so that I can be like, oh, let's test Rapid Defender in this slot instead. It's a weird card. Like, it's a reaction you have to like really keep up on, and it's good. But sometimes I find that like it doesn't do enough for me, especially if I'm doing any sort of invading, and that's who's left alive. So again, after an enemy fighter's move action, if that enemy fighter is in no one's territory or your territory. Now, for the most part, I think this is where a lot of the game is happening when you're pairing Thorns with Fearsome Fortress. Push this fighter 1 hex towards that fighter. This could just push your fighter 1, and that's all you ever needed it to do. So like maybe you had somebody in a backfield behind an objective, you had Rapid Defender in your hand, and you're like, okay, this back objective is held. Like, I already can consider this back objective held, because once I get a Seed Glory, I'm going to put Rapid Defender on. My enemy is going to move in at some point, challenge my front line, and I'm just going to react with Rapid Defender, and it's going to get me into my scoring position. And that's all you needed to do. It can continue to react across the rounds, for sure. Like, it's not limited to once per round, but it's also important to note that you don't need to use it. I find that this card can be a little bit of, like, if you're constantly trying to keep it in mind, it can be a little bit of mental load, which isn't a bad thing. But it is something that might take you, like, you might start playing more cute than good, and you might be like, oh, I got to keep in mind my Rapid Defender reaction, and then that kind of pulls you away from something else that you were thinking about and planning for. So just be careful with it. I think it's good. I think it like has potential in here. It might be push overload if I dare to say. We have 7 pushes in our Gambits already. When I used to build championship decks, I would shove as many pushes in as I could, and then part of my testing, I would realize that there were times where I'd rather have damage over a push, because I was already helping myself out so much with pushes, or I'd rather have like a card that could shore up one of my weaknesses instead of like there was this balancing act of finding how many pushes was the right amount of pushes, because you had access to so many. And we might be in a situation like that here, where there might be a better upgrade if we think to ourselves, you know what, we've actually satisfied the amount of pushes that we need in the 7 that we're taking already. And that sounds like heresy. Like, I hear myself saying it, and I hear you. But let's take a look when we get to recommendations, if there are any upgrades that could offer us a different a different utility in this slot. So in chat, you're basically trading an upgrade slot for another push Gambit, except it's not an illusion, so you have to have Seed Glory for it too. Absolutely. All right, so Siege Master's great. Like this should be in here. This should be in most Fearsome Fortress decks, because of the fact that it is going to make you so you can't be driven off of scoring positions that Fearsome Fortress is looking for, like things like Conquer Domain, and the fact that it can also score you Earthworks just just casually, right? Like as a reaction to my turn, I'm just going to score earthworks real quick, as well as then strengthen my positions and strengthen my defense. Siege Master is great. Note, so how this card reads: after this fighter's activation, if this fighter is on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory, so you're in what I call that fortress territory, choose up to 2 friendly fighters on feature tokens. Give each chosen fighter 1 guard token. You do not have to choose your Siege Master fighter. You can choose any 2 people that are on objective tokens, or sorry, on feature tokens. It's just often you're going to choose the fighter that is doing the Siege Mastering, because that could be earthworks, and because those positions are so valuable. But you're not limited to that. The only thing that you're limited on is you can't activate this from any feature token. So you're always activating it from Fortress territory, but you don't necessarily have to grant it there. Often you'll grant it to that fighter and 1 other, though. Just something to keep in mind. A lot of people, myself included, very much so myself included, summarize cards to like kind of the understanding that they build around it as they play, and then they can miss nuances and miss like opportunities that were available to them because they summarized a card. And maybe you have 2 fighters in enemy territory holding objectives and you really need them there. Well, you can get your siege fighter into, or your siege master fighter into position, react, pass those guard tokens off to that fighter. But if you summarize this as my siege master fighter plus 1 other, then you might miss that. All right, enough on that. Stalwart Sentinel. This fighter cannot be pushed by an opponent's warband while this fighter is on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory. So we're shoring up our positioning here. If they have any push tech, so if you're up against a Fearsome Fortress pairing, you're playing a mirror match here, and they have makeshift bombardment. I'm just using it as an example. They won't be able to use that to push you. Same would be true of something like Brief Emergence from Rhymeworm's Bite. That card won't work against you. And I think that especially now, like with more enemy push cards available through something like Rhymeworm's Bite existing, that ups the value of Stalwart Sentinel. You do have to defend the attack, but you do have 2 dodge to do so. And maybe you can even get a guard token down on your... Well, I guess if you get a guard token down on your fighter, the only thing that this card is then doing is making sure that they can't push you with Gambits and abilities. But even before you get a guard token on you, this could be the difference on your position, because they could drive you off. So Stalwart Sentinel is going to help prevent that, going to help shore up your position. It's another card that doesn't always make it in for me, but I like it here quite a bit. Walking Wall. We've already heard me talk about Walking Wall a lot as we were going through different elements of the deck here. It's just so good. It creates a scoring position for you, as well as a position that you can combo cards off of. We don't have... There's one reaction that you have to mind your footing on. Didn't make it into this deck. What's it called? I gotta look it up. Can't believe it's escaping me right now. Determined Push. Determined Push is an interesting card that you need to keep in mind when you are running Walking Wall, because sometimes this can jam up the Determined Push. So either the nearest feature token, so Determined Push reaction, play this after a friendly fighter's attack action. Pick 1, push that friendly fighter 1 hex towards the hex their target occupied during the declare attack action step, or 1 hex towards the nearest feature token. If you are playing Determined Push because you want to get 1 hex towards the nearest feature token, instead of where the hex that was just occupied by your the target of your attack, then if you're wearing Walking Wall, you're already on the nearest feature token, so that's not available to you. B, if you are near your Walking Wall fighter, and that is the nearest feature token, then that's where you're going, is towards your buddy. And that might be great, but like that can be hard to keep in mind in the moment, that this invisible feature token that's being created by Walking Wall is actually what I'm nearest to. When you're looking at the board and you're thinking about positioning and stuff like that, and you're looking at the tokens, you might forget that a walking wall fighter is actually what you're most eligible to push towards. So something to keep in mind when running walking wall just in general. But overall, this card just slaps. It's my favorite upgrade for this deck. Yeah, walking wall is my favorite upgrade in the Fearsome Fortress deck for sure. Awful Leer, Stare of Death reaction. You can use this once per round, and absolutely, like when this card was designed, once per round probably like got added to this card immediately. I don't think any testing was required to say that this ability should only be once per round. If you ever need help tracking if you've used once per round abilities, or you want to like make that good and transparent, just put a generic token on the card and then clear that off at the end of the round. That way you know, oh, I've already used this round. You don't trick yourself into thinking it's more available or it's available again, because sometimes rounds, are long enough events where maybe you started the round using this, and by the end of the round you're like, oh wait, was that this round or last round? So it's always good to put some sort of reminder on a card like this that you've used it. It's also polite to your opponent. But after this fighter's activation is when you're using this, and again once per round, choose a visible enemy fighter within 4 hexes of this fighter. That fighter cannot make charge super actions in the next activation. So this is great for a multitude of reasons, right? This is going to, as the game goes on, especially, and there are less and less activation options available for your opponent, this might be the only activation that they had planned, and you've now postponed that or prevented it entirely. Like if you were going into their 4th and they've got a fighter that's clearly going to charge you, they're the only one on their team that doesn't have a charge token yet, and you do this, you've prevented their final activation. But this can be used to prevent a high damage attack from getting into position. This can be used to mess with the cadence of their ability to charge out. I love Awful Leer. It is choose a visible enemy fighter. Keep that in mind as people plunder tokens in that are then your block hexes. Those can prevent visibility. If you're playing on boards with block hexes, those can prevent visibility. So that's something to keep in mind. But this card slaps. And then, another trick to showcasing that you've used a card like that, coming in from chat here. So bunny.zip, once again, I usually rotate used cards 90 degrees to mark that they've been used. That way I don't forget to remove the token at the end phase and have to do mental gymnastics over when the token got there. That's a good way to do it as well. I like that a lot. So for the Magic the Gathering backgrounds out there, tap. Tap to indicate that you've exhausted the card, and it will ready again at the beginning of the next phase. I'm adding a ton of other card game terminology in there. Tap, exhaust, ready, like Arkham Horror TCG. Anybody out there? Not TCG, collectible card game. Mentioned my wife earlier. Her favorite card game is the Arkham Horror collectible card game. So we go through campaigns of that together, and we have never played. Oh my gosh, Path to Carcosa, and that's our next one. Pretty pumped for that. All right, on to Enforcer. So Enforcer is our next upgrade here. You cannot give this to a minion. Friendly fighters within 2 hexes of this fighter cannot be driven back. This can be so cool. We have redundancy here with Stalwart Sentinel as well. So you can only give Enforcer to these 3. These are also the same people that you're going to be giving Unliving Overseer to. So they do need to be kept alive. There are multiple reasons why you need these fighters alive over the course of the game anyways. They're your most accurate. They're your highest damage. They've got your abilities. These 3, are more the warband than these bodies that they're pushing around. I mean, don't get me wrong. These are super necessary parts of the warband, and it falls apart without them. But these 3 are like your key fighters. And so you kind of paint more of a target on their head, but at the same time, they were already painting quite the big target on their own heads. So I find like cards like this to be really good outside of the fact that they didn't put you cannot give this to a minion down here in a black restricted box. That would have been really polite of them, because then you could salvage, but they're so strong. I understand the balancing act here. Like, you can actually use salvage as a balancing lever and say, you know what, this ability is too good, or like, and we don't need to inject like more value into it by making it salvageable. Totally understand. Enforcer alongside Stalwart Sentinel. Again, that redundancy I like seeing, but I would prefer, I think in a lot of cases, Enforcer over Stalwart Sentinel. So I don't know if there's a reason to like keep Enforcer and cut Stalwart for another card, or to just keep both and enjoy that redundancy and the fact that you could have, you know, this guy guarding people not in that zone, and then Stalwart Sentinel helping out with your fortress territory zone specifically. That's cool. So the one thing I don't like about this card and Unliving Overseer is it's just they kind of, I guess the one con with Enforcer in general is that it's going to dictate the position of that fighter a lot, and sometimes that might not be the right answer. So like, you want to weigh your activations against how many fighters do I need in not driven backable positions versus what else I could be doing with this fighter. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes what else you can be doing with that fighter is more valuable than providing that bubble of cannot be driven back. Horrifying Malice. While this fighter has one or more charge tokens, -1 dice from enemy fighters' attack actions to a minimum of 1 if the attacker is adjacent to this fighter. I think this card's hilarious. I love this card. So as long as you have the amount of pushes that we have in this deck, it cranks up the chance that this is going to occur. And so something like Rapid Defender actually combos with this. So this might be an argument towards Rapid Defender because it's already providing you with push tech of its own, right? And then if you can pressure somebody by saying like, oh, you just charged, okay, I'm gonna use Rapid Defender to move in next to you, and now Horrifying Malice is in play. That's just really rude. So cards like this can be written in one of two ways. It can be written where it's -1 dice if this fighter is the target. That's often what you see. Cards like Horrifying Malice here are better, where, at least I think, while this fighter is adjacent to the attacker, -1 dice to the attacker, because it allows you to continually like push into one fighter into that adjacency, even though that fighter might not have been like their prime target. And so whoever they're targeting, regardless, is getting that -1 dice, and it could even be this fighter that they're attacking if you can make that adjacency occur. So if they've got like a range 2 fighter on you, and they're trying to kill your Horrifying Malice fighter, who also has Rapid Defender, charge, push in with Rapid Defender, -1 dice. Good luck, you know. So there's some fun play just with both existing, but I really like cards like Horrifying Malice. The other ghosts that I enjoy so much, Mournflight, have a similar ordeal, and then their leader can push anytime she's not the target of an attack. So I'll give it to her, and then if somebody near her is attacking one of my fighters that isn't her, push in and be like, okay, but like as you process this attack, -1 dice, and it's like, so you can do a similar trick with Rapid Defender there. All right, Merciless Superior. So we now have 3 cards that are looking to not be given to minions. I would be afraid of like stacking all of these into the same deck and then potentially like being bricked on these 3 fighters being killed. That's just me. We'll we'll see as we get to recommendations if there's any of these that I want to swap out. They are all extremely powerful. While this fighter is within 3 hexes of one or more friendly chain rasps, you can reroll 1 defense dice in that chain rasp's defense roll. So I like Merciless Superior more than I like Enforcer, because Merciless Superior has a wider bubble, so my positioning goes further and is more flexible. I can do more that I want with that fighter while still maintaining some sort of coverage. And so Enforcer, what's nice about Enforcer, and here's where my argument falls apart. So like, yes, I like Merciless Superior better, but Enforcer is all friendly fighters, and being within 2 hexes of this fighter cannot be driven back. It doesn't say other friendly fighters, so this fighter themselves also cannot be driven back. So that's really good. You can't just have somebody like come in and drive back your Enforcer, and all of a sudden your bubble has changed. They'll have to kill your Enforcer to change your bubble, or find a different way to push you outside of a drive back. So Enforcer is really good. I just like Merciless Superior more because I've got 4 minions. They're often, or 5 chain rasps. Sorry, this is chain rasps, not minions. Yeah. So 5 of my fighters are chain rasps. This is a bigger bubble that can help cover them. And if they can reroll into like a crit or something like that, then that might be what I needed more than like they can't be driven back. So let's say currently the Enforcer is covering them. They can't be driven back. Well, if they roll 2 dice, they roll 1 success, 1 fail, but the attack coming in had 2 successes. I'm dead. Like, I'm dead before I get a chance to even not be driven back, right? So Merciless Superior allows me a second roll, or a reroll of that second dice. And I roll into, like a basic success. Cool, awesome. Like, even just a second basic success there now keeps my fighter alive. And all of these pushes that I have can then bring them back into position. But if I didn't have that reroll and I just had can't be driven back, I'm dead before drive back step. Merciless Superior, sure, I might be driven back. I'm still alive. And if I roll that crit, I also probably stopped them from being able to drive me back. Or if I was able to outnumber their successes, I was able to stop them from driving me back. So that's why I like this one more. But you can bring both. Again, these cards are really powerful. There's just some risk to the fact that there are 3 fighters that these can go on, and they might dwindle, and you might need them in other places. And then Unliving Overseer, we've already gone over. This card's fantastic. These 2 are my favorite of their upgrades. So we're to that stage of a deck doctor section where we take a look at, are there any other cards that I think are like interesting from like a were they on the cutting floor, and would we recommend them coming in? So like initially I'm kind of looking at maybe Impregnable Defenses, although I actually really don't mind it here with the support we're giving it. We're giving it support with Spectral Parry, Ready for Anything, and Siege Master. So frankly, I think it's probably pretty good. The time it's going to be its worst is when we haven't gotten our Inspire off. So remember that our Inspire for these fighters are in the first Inspire step to your turn. So this is before the fighter even activates. This fighter is adjacent to 1 or more enemy fighters. So that means if you're able to push into good positions before your turn, then multiple fighters can Inspire, because we're not isolated to the fighter we're inspiring. It's at the start of my turn. We take that Inspire step and inspire those fighters. So in the first Inspire step in your turn, which makes me think too, does that mean every turn both starts and ends with Reaction, Inspire, Surge? It has to be. So something that we don't really think about or talk about when we're playing games is that there's a Reaction, Inspire, Surge after every bit of it, as well as, so like let me back that up. So Reaction, Inspire, Surge, turn, And that kicks your turn off. Then you activate. Then Reaction Inspire Surge follows your activation. Every activation is followed by Reaction Inspire Surge step. And then Power. And then Power has a Reaction Inspire Surge step after it. And so you've seen 3 Reaction Inspire Surges. And even though we just had one after Power, technically then the next turn begins and starts with one again. So you actually have back-to-back Reaction Inspire Surge steps at the as a result of the one after Power and then the one at the start of a turn. Just not something that really comes up much, or that you really have to think about much. But their Inspire definitely cares that they have one available to them there. So, and it's kind of interesting to me that the one after Power and the one at the start of your turn don't just share the same window, but there's actually a double stack of 2 of them, which is why I guess I'm like going over it, because it's kind of interesting. Okay, so Impregnable Defenses. Are there any other surges that I'd recommend for that slot? So, and because this is a warband we've taken a look at before, what can we learn from the deck that we built for them? So I'm actually going to load Prophecy of Thorns into another tab here. We're going to tab over to it. So, oh, right. Hold on. It gets weird about trying to open 2 different decks at the same time. But there's a way around it. I guess what I want to do is I just want to, so you can open up like an incognito browser session, sign in. So I have to sign back in with, that sign in is going to be prohibitive actually. Okay, there's another way around this. Let's go to battlemallet.com. So let's do that. Deck lists, Battle Mallet, because we built this and it is up here, Prophecy of Thorns. Boom, there we go. And this is a shareable URL. So the shareable URLs, you can load as many of them as you want. But anytime you're working with the deck editor, you can really only have one deck loaded in for the purposes of editing, which is why I couldn't open that second tab with the second deck there. Okay, so we had Scores to Settle in this deck. So how do I feel about Scores to Settle potentially make it into this Fearsome Fortress build from Zach? So score this immediately after the second or subsequent successful attack action made by a friendly minion in this phase, or an activation step if your warband holds each objective in enemy territory at least 1. And we're looking at a total glory ceiling of 17 over here with any flexibility we can get from Conquered Domain. So that can crank this up, obviously. Bounty can crank this up as well, but our floor is 17. But before things get added to Conquered Domain and bounties. So we could potentially look at like a 2-point surge to crank up how many points we can look at. I actually found Scores to Settle to be fairly reliable across my games, and it wasn't the successful attacks. Like, I was pleasantly surprised every once in a while that would just happen, made by minions. But for the most part, it was an activation step. Immediately after an activation step, if your warband holds each objective in enemy territory, at least 1. And the reason this was good is because it's after any activation step, mine or theirs. So in a deck that, like this Fearsome Fortress one that we're looking at, we could actually use some of this push tech to help with that. So all of a sudden, you can redeploy from 1 in your territory to 1 in their territory. You can use sudden mugging to get there. You can use makeshift bombardment from 1 in their territory to the other 1 in their territory if there's only 2 over there. And at any point in time, if you can delve one of theirs and they don't delve it back, then you only need to get to the other one and hold 1 to like score 2 points. So I actually really liked Scores to Settle quite a bit. And I think that there's even more reason to bring it in here than in the Passive Prophecy build I was running. In Passive Prophecy, I found the easiest times for me to score it was when I got lucky and had what was it? Tread the Path in my hand, because it would allow me to delve underneath an objective token I was on, and if I was holding other ones around the board, then I could make a move action out of sequence and push move my fighter essentially to the other one, which was really nice. So, I mean, in that case, you have to be holding 3 objectives. But I found that, like, even if I was holding 2 or 1, like, that might be enough to then use something like slinking in there. So, like, the cards in here can help support it here. And I think the cards in Fearsome Fortress help facilitate it even better, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, over here I had to use Reversal of Fate occasionally as the way that I would flip the other token and then use something like slinking in there to push in. So there were multiple cards that could like add up to scoring scores to settle, but I think those add up better over here. So the question is, what would I recommend swapping out? I think personally, he's won me over on Impregnable Defenses with the amount of support he's bringing for it. Scores immediately after an activation step. Yeah, but this is any activation step as well. And Impregnable Defenses is reliant on your opponent throwing dice at you in that position. So they could always hold off to try to like starve this card so that you don't get like multiple surges off and around. And the dice might like just continue to work for them, and then you never are able to score Impregnable Defenses because they just keep getting attacks through. Yeah, I think if I were to make a recommendation looking at this deck, like all of our defensive options still help with everything, but we could knock Impregnable Defenses out and grab scores to settle. So that would be a recommendation I'd make, especially because I think it's a lot of fun to work towards. I think it synchronizes with a lot of things that you're trying to do already. Or does it? It helps with Reclaimed Turf, and it helps with Tides of Death, which is where I was thinking. Helps with those two the most. It doesn't necessarily help with Underground Fortress. It could help with Stockpile. It definitely doesn't help with Conquered Domain, unless they're just over the line. I don't know. I still think it's worth testing here. I like the point elevation that we're getting out of it as well. And I don't think it's that big of an ask. You also don't have to worry about has my fighters gotten above their 1 dodge defense yet to be able to score it. Because that's another reason why Impregnable Defenses is going to be hard. Okay, yeah, firm recommendation on that. And then what else was kind of like left out? Let's see. Deathly Clutches. 2 or more friendly fighters become inspired in the same Inspire step. That's fun with the amount of push tech that we have. That's pretty easy. Or an activation step if 4 or more friendly fighters are in enemy territory. Would I recommend this over Impregnable Defenses? So I guess if Scores to Settle becomes a card that Zach decides, you know what, it's not quite working for me. It doesn't quite mesh. With the amount of pushes that you have, you could consider Deathly Clutches. You could always plug Impregnable Defenses back in, but I've already stated my hesitation there. Sorcerer's Syndicate. Score this immediately after damage dealt by a friendly wizard. Took an enemy fighter out of action. So what's cool is this doesn't need to be a spell. So this can be a kill, but this is a kill surge, and we didn't have any in here. And I don't feel compelled to like force one in. Throat Cutters. Score this immediately after an enemy fighter was taken out of action if that fighter was inspired or that fighter was on a starting hex in enemy territory. So this is an even worse kill surge. So like here, the limitation is there's only 2 fighters on our side that can do this. There are already 2 fighters that are going to have pretty heavy targets on their heads. And like there's a chance that we draw this after they've perished. Or we had to pull them out of positioning that they could have offered us with those awesome upgrades to score it. So plenty of reason to not take that. Throat cutters is really reliant on your enemy, right? They have to have found a way to inspire, or they have to be on a starting hex. So definitely don't want that in there. Impregnable defenses, I think, is still on deck as like a 7th or 8th surge. Lethal defenses, score this immediately after an enemy fighter is taken out of action within 1 hex of 1 or more feature tokens that are within 1 hex of no one's territory. So another kill surge that's also dependent on positioning. The positioning is pretty generous here. There's going to be a lot of time that you and enemies are spending in these positions, but it is still a kill surge with added extras. So I respect it not being in here. And raw materials, place a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory during an action phase if 1 or more enemy fighters are out of action. This can be really hard in a Fearsome Fortress deck because of plunder. So at the beginning of a game with Fearsome Fortress, you are placing a token out. There's no May. So you're already reducing the pool by 1. And if you go for cover, which is generally advised, then it's not like it's going to melt and come back into the pool for you either. You're limited to only placing 1. So once somebody plunders and places that in, raw materials is no longer scoreable until you get access to something like Bold Engineer to help you pick up and place a feature token once again. Yeah, I overall, like, I think that the Surge packet was already really strong, was already really good. I just think that this is a fun little bump up without too much more trouble, especially compared to the drawbacks I already pointed out with impregnable defenses. The objective suite is so good that I don't think that we need to spend too much time looking, or the end phase, looking at what was left on the table. So Siege Breakers, 2, if they're all of your opponents are in, let me just read it verbatim instead of trying to summarize it. Score this in an end phase if there are no enemy fighters in your territory. I don't know why that was so hard to summarize. It's already short. No need to summarize it harder. So, that's a 2-pointer. And he's already got 2 points in every single one of his end phases, if you consider Conquer Domain to be like kind of 2+, and it really can. So that's really the only 2-pointer from Fearsome Fortress he's leaving behind, and I hate this card, so I'm super happy to not see it considered here. It doesn't belong here. And so foreboding inevitability, there are 1 or fewer surviving enemy fighters from each enemy warband, or 1 or more enemy leaders are vulnerable. Yeah, no, you don't want to keep an enemy leader vulnerable for scoring purposes, like ever. You want to be able to kill them if you can. So you never want to feel pressured into leaving them vulnerable. It can also be really hard to get them vulnerable. That relies on like damage going through correctly, like to add up to vulnerability. That also relies on them not having any heal. There are 1 or fewer surviving enemy fighters from each enemy warband. So that's like an extreme aggro card for them. That's taking your game plan completely away from hold and pushing it heavily into aggro, and only for 2 points. So no, that should be behind as well. So very strong end phase package. I'm on board with it. And then let's take a look at actually what spells have been left on the deck. Torment's Lash and Castigating Scream. So if cast, +1 dice to the first range 1 or range 2 attack action made by a friendly fighter in the next activation. If that attack action is supported, -1 defense dice to the target's defense rolls for that attack action to a minimum 1. So this is looking for a focus, and we're increasing the odds of landing our attack. It could potentially also do a -1 defense dice, which is kind of spicy. But this is, I can't draw a line from this to any of our objectives. So this is just for the sake of kind of like removing their fighters, right? And yes, that gets us bounty, but that also changes their side of the equation quite a bit. So like if we're bringing cards that are only there to help remove targets, generally that sounds like a really good thing. And it can be if we're able to get the right targets down, right? If we're able to get the ones that are the most problematic down for us, But as we remove targets, we also like, especially below 4, we also increase charge it out for them. And so they can charge somebody into a spot that's going to hurt our scoring position. And then whether they're successful or not, they might end up being able to then, with their charge out status, get a second shot at that. So you might actually be considering occasionally like managing fighter count so that they have to activate with each fighter. So they have to activate with a suboptimal fighter compared to like a really ferocious like problem for you. That's just something to think about. That's going way too hard into analyzing if Castigating Scream should be in a deck. I just kind of wanted to like talk about how it can affect like aggro, how your aggro can impact your hold in a way that maybe most people don't think about. And then Torment Slash over here. So if cast, choose one other fighter within 4 hexes of the caster. If the chosen fighter is an enemy fighter, deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter. If the chosen fighter is a friendly fighter, push the chosen fighter 1 hex. If the chosen fighter is a friendly Chain Rasp, push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes instead. So I can't believe I'm about to advocate for this because it's a spell card. But I actually would rather see Torment's Lash in this deck than Bound Spirit. Because Bound Spirit is only going to go off if we can hold that position and the attack does not go through. So if they're able to drive us back, if we haven't gotten anything to prevent that yet, if we're on 1 dodge still, or if their attack just gets through and kills us, like Bound Spirit is not going to do enough for us in those cases. And I find that this card often stays in hand. So Torment's Lash, absolutely something I'd recommend over it. So you're probably casting it off of your leader. You can always back up cast it off of Varklov. But it allows you the flexibility of a damage that you were trying to get from Bound Spirit, but also a push, right? So this could be something that you play for the push or for the damage. And frankly, I feel like it's got a better odd of getting that damage down than Bound Spirit would have on its own, and less threat of like sticking to your hand across rounds when it shouldn't. So that's what I'm putting in there for now, but is there anything else in here that I would consider instead? So Endless Malice, reaction, play this during a friendly fighter's attack action after the defense roll if the attack action would fail. The combat sequence ends and the attacker makes an attack action that must target the same enemy fighter. So again, if we're looking for ways to deal damage to the enemy, which is something that Bound Spirit was trying to accomplish, I think this is a better way to accomplish damage that wouldn't have been dealt otherwise, right? And Endless Malice can be on any fighter, and so that could be 2-3 damage, potentially from any of these 3 fighters. Three being something that the Briar Queen can bring if she lucks into Grievous there. Do I think Endless Malice is maybe the right card for this slot? It's tough between Torment Slash and it, because we have so many pushes, and this is a spell. If our leader goes down, the ability to cast this goes down, and we're not able to salvage it until we lose our most key fighter. So I think this is like a really good round 1, round 2 card. Less so later, depending on which fighters you still have available to you. But I think Torment Slash could be really good, especially over Bound Spirit. But what did we put in instead? Endless Malice. I'd recommend both of these cards over Bound Spirit for sure. Endless Malice could be like that key attack, because you can always save this too. Like there are going to be plenty of times to use like a I missed this attack card, and to be able to try it again. And so you can kind of wait for like, oh no, this is like a big one, I really need this to go through, and try a second time. And then you can potentially get rid of that more ferocious fighter on their side, leave them with a more suboptimal fighter that they're going to have to like tool up and work with. Grasping Chains. In the first attack action in the next activation, each friendly chain rasp that supports the attacker is considered to be one additional supporting fighter. I don't think that card does too much, especially with Wave of Terror already available to us. Spectral Touch. The first attack action made by a friendly fighter in the next activation has Cleave and Stagger. I'd rather take Endless Malice over Cleave and Stagger. Determined Push. We don't need to bring. Now, what would be something that Determined Push can bring to this equation that isn't already being accomplished by the push that we're bringing is, well, no, most of the tech that we can bring does this anyways, just at a different time. So if we push this fighter off, then we can react and follow in. But you can also just push them off, and then the first card in your power step, you use that to push on. And there's more flexibility with the ones that we're bringing. So yeah, I'd continue to leave that at home. Not a fan of Gnarlwood Tusks. Healing Ward isn't going to do enough for us. Opportunistic Reprisal, we're probably not tossing enough stagger around. And Tangle Briar is good, but only until that initial placement is done. And then if there's nothing to melt, then Tangle Briar actually bricks and you don't have any usefulness for it. So Tangle Briar would be something I'd bring to help speed up like your chances at, well, raw materials. But when you bring raw materials, you also kind of have to maybe consider putting a blocked token in as like a melting token at the beginning. But anyways, we're not worrying about those cards. They're not in this deck. So let's get rid of Bound Spirit for sure. And then we just kind of have to make a decision on, if we think Torment Slash is better or Endless Malice is better. And I think in this case, we can actually say we can go for Endless Malice. Just because I think we have enough push already. I do like that this does one or the other, like that you can choose an enemy fighter and deal 1 damage to them. Man. Endless Malice or Torment Slash. This is hard in this slot. There's nothing else that I want to pull out, or nothing else that I think wins out over these options. So it really is just between these two options. Yeah, we'll pull Torment Slash out. At the very least, then you have card reliability, right? Like you don't have to worry about a spell not going off. And so at least you just get a second chance on making that attack on your own. And it could be a pretty key attack. So then over here, we were, I think, maybe considering probably Stalwart Sentinel and Rapid Defender as cards that we might pull out. We'd keep Enforcer over Stalwart Sentinel in most cases, because Enforcer also helps itself. So like an Enforcer can run into no one's territory, and if there's a feature token in there that is helping you with Underground Fortress, Conquer Domain, it could be closer than your normal, like within 3 that objectives are. And so Enforcer can help it and the person next to it. So then it's doing more than Stalwart Sentinel could have done for us in that case. The redundancy, again, isn't terrible to have. It's just, is there anything else that we would like to bring in? And then we'll wrap the episode here. Gotta think of a good name for this one yet. Chill Touch, Ensnare, don't think that's going to do enough for us. Driven by Hatred, +1 dice. While they have 1 or more charge tokens, that's a very aggro-focused card. Grasping Thorns, after this fighter's successful attack action. I should probably bring this down a little bit. There you go. After this fighter's successful attack action, you can push the target up to 2 hexes. They must end this push adjacent to this fighter. So you're bringing somebody closer to you. It's restricted to the Briar Queen. I don't think there's enough usefulness there. It's a weird card. We talked a little bit about it during the Prophecy of Thorns episode. Shacklegeist chains. Each time this fighter's range 1 or range 2 attack action takes a target out of action, gain 1 additional glory point. And this is limited to Varklov, but again, this is another case for an aggro deck for them. Like there is one in here. I haven't seen one played myself yet, but there's definitely the possibility for one present inside this deck. Spectral Coils is a card I really like. I wonder if we have room to fit this in. So reform reaction. After this fighter is taken out of action, give this upgrade to another friendly Chain Rasp. You can use this reaction even if this fighter is out of action. So why this card is so good, in my mind, is it's a range 2 attack to your minions or to your Chain Rasps. Normally they'd only have range 1. It's more accurate than what they have, and it can bring in extra damage. So it increases their threat range, especially if they're like defending objectives. Their target might not just be immediately next to them. It might be a range 2 fighter, sitting just outside of their range, charged, ready to put 3-4 activations into you. And if you have something like Spectral Coils, you can pop that on, hit them, and then potentially drive them back. And you've now, made it so they have fewer activations, so that they can do something like that against you. I don't know if we're going to have room for this. This might have been like a hard cut for Zach. Defensive charges. After this fighter's activation, stagger each enemy adjacent to 1 or more feature tokens that are in the same hex as a friendly fighter. Then break this card. Nah. Hardy Scout, +1 move, +1 wound if we're not in there in your territory. I could see this helping. Can't give it to large fighters, but I can see this helping with the guard card, as well as like just getting into enemy territory, getting to the positions that we need. Just bypass the guards. That's something to consider. It does then bump us up to 3 health instead of 2, so a lot of the times that's a much harder. Reaching 3 damage is above average for a fighter. Your average damage output is 2, so this puts somebody in risky territory, potentially at that harder to kill spot, even if they are able to get an attack in. Mason's Great Hammer, range 1, 2 damage, and 2 hammers, Cleave and Grievous. I like this card, but I don't think it needs to be in here. Melding Stone. This could be interesting. Each hex within 2 hexes of this fighter that contains a feature token is considered to be a cover hex in addition to its other types. So this is a bubble that any of our fighters could offer us instead of just the main 3. And it would increase objectives to be more defensive. On our 2 dice, all of a sudden cover is working towards us. Toss that in there real quick to think about. And Starmaw, probably not something we need. Nice range 4 attack though. So I did add 3 cards in. That was Spectral Coils, let's see, Melding Stone, and Hardy Scout. And I still would only be really comfortable with maybe getting rid of Rapid Defender, Stalwart Sentinel, and that would be it from a comfortability standpoint. I think the rest are really good towards what he's doing here. And so I think Stalwart Sentinel I would pull out. I think I like either Hardy Scout or Spectral Coils better. So I'd pull again with Brief Emergence is a little bit of my hesitation here. But I think, you know what? Spectral Coils for Stalwart Sentinel. We'll do that as a test. And then Rapid Defender, especially since I didn't opt for that additional spell that can provide pushing. Oh, no, I don't know if Rapid Defender is going to do enough. Sure. All right. Rapid Defender gone. Spectral Coils and Hardy Scout in. I could see Hardy Scout going out for either of Zach's original picks. But this could potentially get you into a position that your opponent didn't think that you could reach and make you harder to remove from their territory. Okay. Well, with that, That's a wrap on today's episode with Thorns of the Briar Queen and Fearsome Fortress. The only task left is a good name. Do we have any good names to throw Zach? I think. Um, do we have any cards that kind of stick out? I feel like we can lean into like ghostly, ghastly, parts of Thorns of the Briar Queen here. Like ghostly Walls of the Briar Queen would be the longest name that we've made so far. I do like Walking Wall. Can we use Walking Wall in here? Maybe maybe Ghostly Wall. No, that's too simple. I kind of want to use. They're floating. They're ethereal. The ethereal rose wall. The ethereal rose wall. Ethereal. Does ethereal mean what I think it does? Let's look. Ethereal meaning light, airy, or tenuous, and ethereal world created through the poetic imagination, extremely delicate or refined ethereal beauty. I thought like ethereal had more like ghostly meaning to it. Let's see, ethereal ghosts. Yeah, it does. Like a ghostly figure at the top of the stairs. Okay. Maybe the Briar Wall. Actually, the Briar Wall, I think I like a lot. The Briar Wall. There you go, Zach. The Briar Wall. All right. And so this deck, I'm sure is going to be something that Zach is testing out. I'm currently testing the Exiled Dead with Breakneck Slaughter. So more to come on that next week. Next week's episode, we'll start with a field report on that deck. So that is Gale Force Frighters. And we will be working on building a deck for Voidcurse Thralls plus Grashlax Despoilers. So that episode is going to be July 2nd. And I look forward to seeing you at that time. So we'll close the show out here. If you would like to try this deck out, and I'm probably going to try to sneak some games of this in myself, the deck list is going to be available for you in the description below. I'll be posting that there. But all of the decks on the show are posted to the Battle Mallets Nemesis library. It's something I am super happy that they are interested in hosting, and I'm very happy that that's something that we get to do. So you can see this deck build and many more at their library. You can best reach me in the comments section below or on the Mortal Realms Discord, and you can check out all the Mortal Realms Network has to offer, including a link to our Discord at themortalrealms.com. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you next week. I've been Skylar, and this has been What the Decks.